She is a narrated fiction story created for discussion and entertainment purposes.
Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. You never forget the day you accidentally dethrone a tyrant. I bought a house for pennies, only to discover it belonged to the most feared HOA president in the county. She ruled with fines and threats until I showed up. What started as a deal turned into a war for justice and freedom. You never forget the first time you accidentally ruined someone's life, especially when that someone is a tyrannical HOA president with a god complex and a taste for control. My name's Nick Horn. I'm 42, a former commercial real estate agent, now running my own little empire of foreclosure flips and tax deed acquisitions. I specialize in what the industry calls distressed assets, which is a polite way of saying I buy people's financial failures and turn them into profit. I was sitting in my home office one Friday morning, sipping burnt diner coffee, scrolling through the county's online auction site, half listening to a true crime podcast about a pharmacist who faked cancer meds for money. Standard stuff. I clicked on a parcel listed as Clearwater Knoll 72B, tax delinquency 5 years. At first glance, just another suburban home in another overregulated HOA-infested community. I almost skipped it until the owner's name loaded, Karen Maddox. That name stopped me cold. I knew it. Anyone in the area who's dealt with a homeowners association knew it. Karen Maddox, iron-fisted president of the Clearwater Knoll HOA, queen of citations, destroyer of garden gnomes. She once filed a lawsuit against a neighbor for repainting their shutters the wrong shade of beige. I remembered reading about it in a local real estate bulletin and thinking, that's exactly why I never buy into HOA territory. Curiosity turned into interest. I pulled the property file, and holy hell, what a gold mine. The house was assessed at nearly $400,000, but Karen hadn't paid property taxes in 5 years. That's not a typo. 5 whole years. She'd racked up liens, ignored certified notices, and somehow managed to avoid enforcement. My best guess, she assumed HOA funds were paying her property taxes, which is not how any of that works. But hey, when you're used to power, you start to believe you're exempt from rules. I spent the rest of the day digging through public records, title histories, even the HOA's own meeting minutes. Nothing suggested she'd even acknowledge the debt. This wasn't a trap or a bureaucratic screw-up. It was real, and it was clean. I verified the tax deed process with the county clerk. Yes, the title would be insurable after quiet title. And no, the HOA had no lien on the home itself. The best part? Since it was a tax sale, the HOA couldn't block or influence the transaction. Their beloved bylaws were irrelevant. I bid under a corporate shell I often use for these purchases. Didn't want Karen sniffing anything out during the redemption period. My offer, $78,000 flat. No one else touched it. Probably assumed it was protected by HOA status, or were too scared of the Karen name. 30 days later, the redemption period passed without a peep. The deed was recorded. The house was mine. I stared at the digital confirmation like I'd just won the damn lottery. Not because of the house. I've flipped a dozen better. No, this was symbolic. I had just legally foreclosed on the woman who probably thought she owned the neighborhood. The irony tasted better than any scotch in my collection. The next day, I drove out to Clearwater Knoll. Their entrance was everything you'd expect. Faux stone pillars, a gold-lettered sign, and that ridiculous pretense of class. I pulled up to the 2-story colonial. Big front porch, trimmed hedges, white shutters, the kind of place built for appearances. I took photos, documented the condition, and mailed the formal notice of change in ownership via certified post. A little formality before the real fun started. She had 30 days to vacate, just like anyone else. I didn't care that she'd ruled this place like a suburban Mussolini. She was a tax delinquent squatting on property she no longer owned. And if she didn't walk out willingly, I'd file for eviction without blinking. As I drove away, I caught sight of her Mercedes in the driveway. Still there, probably sipping overpriced tea on the veranda, totally unaware that her reign was over. Yet, when the certified letter came back unclaimed, I knew she was going to be a problem. Karen Maddox hadn't picked up the official notice from the post office. Maybe she thought ignoring it would make it go away. Or maybe she just didn't believe the system could touch her. Either way, the clock had run out. I now owned her house, and she was still living in it like she ran the damn neighborhood. I decided to pay her a visit. Clearwater Knoll looked the same, sterile, quiet, overwatered. I parked across the street, made sure my phone was recording, and walked up the flagstone path to her pristine white door. She opened it before I even knocked, like she'd been waiting. Her eyes narrowed the moment she saw me. "You must be lost," she said, lips curling into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Karen Maddox?" I asked, holding up the printout of the recorded tax deed. "My name's Nick Horn. I'm the new owner of this property." She blinked, then laughed. Actually laughed. "You're serious?" "I am. You failed to pay property taxes for 5 years. Your house was sold in a tax deed auction. I purchased it. Legally. You've got 30 days to vacate." Her laughter stopped cold. "That's impossible. There's no way this could have happened. The HOA pays all essential property fees." "No, it doesn't," I said flatly. "The HOA can't pay your personal property taxes. That's on you. And now it's mine." She stepped onto the porch, folding her arms. "You think you can just come in here, wave some paper, and take my home? You don't know who you're dealing with. I'm the president of Clearwater Knoll." I smiled. "Oh, I know exactly who you are." That got under her skin. Her lips thinned, and I saw the mask start to crack. She thought her title gave her leverage. She thought I'd back down. "You won't last a week here," she said. "This is a private community. We have rules, regulations. You'll need board approval just to change a light fixture." "I don't need your approval for anything," I replied. "I own the house. You're trespassing." Her voice dropped to a cold murmur. "You'll never step foot inside. You may have won some auction, but this community won't accept you. I'll make sure of that." I left before I said something I'd regret, but as I walked back to my car, I already knew this wasn't going to be a simple eviction. This was going to be war. 3 days later, I received a thick certified packet in the mail from the Clearwater Knoll HOA. Inside was a resolution passed by emergency vote, titled Community Integrity Enforcement Measure. In simple terms, a brand new rule banning ownership transfers without board approval, backdated. The document claimed that no one could legally possess property in Clearwater Knoll unless approved by the HOA board, effective, conveniently, 1 week before the auction where I purchased Karen's house. They even included a letter addressed to me personally, stating that my ownership was not recognized and that all access to the premises is prohibited pending review. I stared at the letter in stunned disbelief. It wasn't just petty, it was illegal. They'd rewritten their own bylaws after the fact and tried to apply them retroactively. I called the number on the letter and got a cheerful assistant named Sherry. "Yes, Mr. Horn," she chirped. "We're aware of your situation. Ms. Maddox convened an emergency session, and the board voted to implement stricter ownership guidelines to protect the community." "Stricter," I repeated. "You mean illegal. You can't backdate HOA rules to block a state-recognized property transfer." "I'm just relaying information," she replied quickly. "But I'd advise against entering the property. The board considers it unauthorized access." That night, my security company pinged my phone. Motion detected at the Clearwater Knoll address. I pulled up the footage. Karen was in the front yard with a local locksmith, replacing the locks on a house I legally owned. A neighborhood patrol officer, private security hired by the HOA, stood nearby, arms crossed, watching like he was protecting a crime scene. The message was clear. I could own the house on paper, but I wouldn't be allowed to claim it without a fight. They thought they could bluff me into submission. They didn't know I'd already won battles worse than this. And I was just getting started. You don't pick a fight with someone like me and expect silence. The morning after Karen changed the locks, I filed the eviction case. Clean, direct, by the book. Unlawful detainer against a non-owner occupant. I submitted the deed, the tax certificate, the redemption lapse confirmation, and let the court do what courts do best, recognize the obvious. But that was just the start. Karen wasn't just some entitled homeowner. She was a manipulative operator with a legal background and a long leash from the board. If I was going to win this, I had to fight her on every front. So I did. First, I reported the HOA to the county district attorney's office. I attached a detailed complaint outlining their unlawful retroactive amendment to the bylaws and the clear attempt to interfere with a valid property transfer. I cited specific sections of Florida's HOA statute, plus case law. I used to write memos like this in my brokerage days. I knew what would get attention and what could be criminal. Second, I sent a formal complaint to the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, the body that oversees HOA operations. I laid out everything: the illegal lockout, the backdated rule change, the coordinated effort to block access to my property. Third, I mailed a package, anonymously, to the Internal Revenue Service with a questionably polite cover letter. This HOA seems to be functioning like a personal fund for one individual. Is that allowed? I attached a few of the public financial summaries I'd scraped from county filings. Karen's name was on most of them, but I wasn't done. I had contacts in real estate journalism. I sent the entire story: the tax default, the rogue HOA, the power-hungry president clinging to a house she no longer owned, to a mid-level editor at Sunbelt Property Law Weekly. The guy owed me a favor, and within a week, the headline ran, "HOA President Squats in Foreclosed Home, Changes Rules to Keep It." It blew up. Not viral, but enough that local investor circles noticed. The article made the rounds on a few finance forums and LinkedIn groups. Comments ranged from "this guy's a legend" to "how is this even legal?" Some mentioned having their own horror stories with HOAs. Others started asking for copies of the documents I'd cited. A week later, I got an email from a stranger. No name, no subject, just one line: "Check the 2019 HOA audit. It's missing pages." Attached was a heavily redacted financial report I hadn't seen before, and it was off. Numbers didn't match prior summaries. Some signatures were cropped out. There were handwritten edits where there should have been notarized approval lines. It was starting to unravel. While the eviction case crawled through the court system, thanks to Karen filing a motion to delay on the basis of community destabilization, I decided to escalate in person. I walked into the HOA office during posted hours and requested the full 5-year financial history, citing Florida's open records requirement for association members. Technically, I was one now, even if they didn't want to admit it. Sherry, the same chirpy assistant from the phone, tried to stall me with, "We'll need to check with legal counsel," and "the president is currently reviewing archival compliance documents." I told her I'd be back in 48 hours with a subpoena if I didn't get a preliminary set. That seemed to rattle her. That evening, I drove to a nearby town for a speaking event, a small meetup of foreclosure investors. I didn't mention Karen by name, but I shared the general story. The room lit up. One guy approached me after and said, "Wait, Clearwater Knoll? Isn't that where that woman tried to fine a family for planting sunflowers?" "Oh, it gets better," I said. The tide was shifting. Karen tried to hit back. The next day, I received an official letter from the HOA's legal counsel accusing me of attempted reputational sabotage, interference with governance, and, my personal favorite, dissemination of inflammatory commentary within financial communities. I framed it right next to my tax deed. The hearing was brief, cleaner than I expected. Maybe it was the sheer arrogance of Karen's filings, full of circular logic, citing HOA bylaws as if they outranked state property law. Maybe it was the way the judge raised his eyebrows when Karen's lawyer claimed the HOA could nullify tax deeds for the sake of neighborhood harmony. Or maybe it was because I had every document, every statute, and every precedent lined up like dominoes. Either way, the ruling was swift. The property in question was transferred in full compliance with Florida Statute 109.7522, the judge said, his voice firm and bored all at once. The Homeowner Association's subsequent policy amendments have no bearing on the legality of this transfer. Mr. Horn is the lawful owner. The court grants his motion for eviction. Just like that. I didn't gloat in court. I kept a straight face as the judge signed the order and handed it to the clerk. Karen, on the other hand, stood frozen like someone had just told her the earth was flat and gravity optional. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering furiously. She didn't respond. As I left the courthouse, the clerk handed me the physical writ of possession, signed, sealed, enforceable. I drove straight to the sheriff's office, handed it over, and requested execution within 48 hours. The deputy didn't even blink. "Oh," he said, glancing at the name. "Her again." It was a beautiful Wednesday morning when we returned to Clearwater Knoll. Me, a deputy, and a locksmith. Karen's Mercedes was still parked out front, curtains drawn, porch plants dead, either from neglect or spite. I stepped out of my car as the deputy knocked, firm and rhythmic. Karen opened the door in a silk robe, full makeup, and an expression that was half shock, half venom. "You're trespassing," she hissed. "No," the deputy said flatly, holding up the writ. "You are. Court order. You've got 15 minutes to collect your essentials. After that, you're out." She looked at me like she was deciding whether to scream or vomit. "You'll regret this," she muttered. "Probably," I said, "but not today." She stomped upstairs. We heard drawers slamming, something crashing. 10 minutes later, she came down with 2 rolling suitcases and a handbag the size of a carry-on. No eye contact, no words. The locksmith got to work changing the locks. I stepped inside for the first time. The interior was performative, over-decorated, like a pottery barn exploded. But beneath the polish, you could feel the cracks. Unopened bills in a drawer, empty wine bottles under the sink, a guest room used as a makeshift office with folders labeled Private HOA Review Only. I'd seen enough estate flips to recognize the signs. This wasn't power, it was desperation dressed in beige. Then I found the black binder, tucked behind the pantry. No label, just duct tape along the spine. Inside, spreadsheets, resident files, annotated meeting minutes. Some had sticky notes. "Find this guy if he installs shed," and "Single mom, Joyce delinquent risk." There were copies of warning letters with altered payment addresses, one going to a P.O. box not listed anywhere on HOA records. That alone would have been enough to fry her. But there was more, much more. Fake balance sheets, pseudo-legal memos stamped with her old law firm's logo, but clearly doctored. Handwritten notes calculating liquidation targets based on overdue fines. In one document, she literally scribbled HOA Reserve Sotsonic Safety Net Personal. I snapped photos, every page, and then came the cherry on top, a spreadsheet listing discretionary accounts with routing numbers. And only one recipient, K. Maddox, Law PLLC. My stomach turned. This wasn't micromanagement or even embezzlement light. This was organized financial misconduct, maybe even fraud. As we were locking up, Karen hovered near the sidewalk, talking loudly to a local woman with a phone. The woman kept filming, asking loaded questions like, "How does it feel to be evicted by a real estate vulture?" I didn't engage. Let her play martyr for her Facebook group. Let her spin stories. I had something better than spin. Evidence. Owning the house meant I was now, technically, a member of Clearwater Knoll HOA. It was a bitterly ironic twist. The very structure I despised had to acknowledge me as one of their own. They didn't want me in their little club, but legally, they couldn't stop it. And I was about to make their lives hell. The bylaws were clear. Every homeowner, regardless of board approval, had the right to access HOA financial records with reasonable notice. So I gave notice. In writing, certified mail, emailed copy, delivered by courier. I requested 5 years of financials, board meeting minutes, vendor contracts, and expenditure logs. Sherry, still the most painfully cheerful assistant I'd ever met, called the next day, her voice trembling beneath the sugar. "Mr. Horn, I passed your request to the board. They feel it's excessive." "Then they can feel nervous," I replied. "You have 10 business days. After that, I go to court. Again." 10 days later, a package arrived, heavy, messy, half-printed PDFs, handwritten ledgers, and 2 flash drives labeled review copy. It smelled of panic and toner. I spent the next 72 hours tearing through it like a forensic accountant on meth. What I found made the binder look like amateur hour. The HOA had spent over $140,000 in the past 3 years on administrative consulting, all billed to a company called KM Advisory Group, LLC. The address? A UPS store in Tampa. The bank account? Matched one of the numbers I'd found in Karen's binder. There were landscaping contracts triple the market rate, awarded to a vendor with no license, and who, surprise, shared a surname with Karen's ex-husband. One invoice simply read, Community Harmony Fund, discretionary dispersal, $8,700. No explanation, no receipts. The 2022 year-end report had photocopied signatures for 3 board members. I called 2 of them. One hadn't attended a meeting in over a year. The other said, quote, "I never signed anything. I thought she was just running things until the next vote." She had forged compliance on an IRS-facing document. I compiled everything into a single report, over 60 pages, with citations, bank trail maps, and timelines. Then I submitted it to 3 places at once: the State Department's Nonprofit Oversight Division, the IRS Exempt Organizations Office, and the local press, specifically a reporter from the Tampa Herald who'd once broken a story on a corrupt condo board skimming hurricane relief funds. But I wasn't done. I drafted a petition under the HOA bylaws, a formal call for an emergency general meeting. I posted it on every HOA-approved bulletin board in the neighborhood: pool gate, community mailbox pavilion, clubhouse doors. I knocked on doors. I didn't even pretend to be polite anymore. Some residents were stunned, some were skeptical, but some were furious and ready. "You're telling me she used our dues to pay her cousin to consult on the color of fence stains?" one guy growled. "Did she really fine the Jensens for not trimming their azaleas and then spent $5,000 on scented stationery?" another woman snapped. Within 48 hours, I had enough signatures. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday night, in the community clubhouse, just behind the tennis courts that hadn't been resurfaced in a decade. Apparently, the money had gone to brand consulting. Karen, somehow still walking free and pretending none of this had happened, posted a notice on the HOA Facebook page calling the meeting illegitimate, accusing me of intimidation, and, the kicker, potential financial terrorism. That post earned her 73 comments. Only 8 were supportive. The rest, not so much. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed, folding chairs everywhere, people standing by the walls. The room smelled like sweat, chlorine, and resentment. I brought a projector, copies of the report, and a full audio recording setup. Karen didn't show up, but her shadow loomed. Her allies sat stiffly near the front, clutching notes and trying to look composed. One of them tried to interrupt as I began presenting. I raised my hand calmly. "I'll take questions at the end, I promise. You'll want to hear all of it first." Slide by slide, page by page, I walked them through the rot. The forged reports, the fake vendors, the self-dealing, the unreported income, the fabricated signatures, audible gasps, mutters. One guy in a golf shirt whispered, "We paid for this." Then I played the recording, a voicemail I'd gotten from a former board member who confessed to signing blank checks at Karen's request to avoid technical hang-ups during budget season. The room exploded. People shouted. Some cried. One elderly woman cursed in Spanish so fluently I nearly applauded. But when I called for a vote to remove the board and initiate a full forensic audit, the room went quiet. Then, slowly, hands rose. By the end, I had over 90% support. The vote passed. The HOA board, Karen's inner circle, was officially suspended pending review. I'd just gutted her regime, but she wasn't done yet. I expected a backlash, but I didn't expect it to show up at my front door with lipstick, rage, and a live streaming phone. 2 days after the emergency meeting, the one where the residents of Clearwater Knoll voted to suspend Karen's HOA board and initiate a forensic audit, she returned, not as the unchallenged president of a frightened community, but as a woman pushed to the edge of her crumbling empire. It was a Saturday morning. I was in the garage cataloging the contents of the now officially mine property when I heard tires screech. A second later, the front gate camera lit up with motion. Karen, wearing a red blazer like it was still 2013, heels clicking across the pavement, and a phone in her hand broadcasting everything live to what I'd later learn was her personal Facebook group, Clearwater Defenders. I opened the front door before she knocked. She didn't wait. "You!" she spat, voice shaking. "You manipulated them. You lied to them. You're trying to dismantle everything I built." "You mean everything you stole?" I said, keeping my voice flat. I knew we were being recorded. "You can't run this place like a feudal estate and expect no one to push back." "You don't belong here," she shouted, stepping closer. "You're a parasite, a predator. You've poisoned these people." Behind her, a few residents stood on sidewalks watching. A woman walking her dog paused. A teenage boy pulled out his phone. "This is my neighborhood," Karen screamed. "And now it's theirs," I replied. "You just ran it into the ground long enough for them to see you for what you are." She lunged. Quick, unexpected. One moment she was yelling, the next her nails were in my collar and her phone hit the porch tiles with a crack. I stepped back instinctively, catching her wrists before she could do more than tear a button from my shirt. "Get your hands off me," she screeched, struggling. I let go. She stumbled back, panting, mascara streaked under one eye. Her phone, still recording miraculously, captured every second. The sheriff's cruiser arrived 7 minutes later. Not the first time a patrol car had visited this address, but probably the most dramatic. I stayed calm. I had no reason not to. Karen, on the other hand, tried to spin. She claimed I'd assaulted her, that I'd ambushed her on public HOA property. The deputy asked for video. I provided the security footage and suggested he retrieve her Facebook live stream before she deleted it. He did. The moment she threw herself at me, crystal clear. The audio, loud, incriminating, and emotionally unhinged. She was arrested on the spot. Battery, trespassing, disorderly conduct. I watched them cuff her hands behind her back as she tried to shout down the deputy, saying it was all staged, that I'd hired actors, that the audit was fake, and the votes were illegal. She didn't realize that at least 10 neighbors were filming the scene from their porches. Within hours, the footage spread. Local Twitter lit up. So did Facebook. One of the residents sent the video to a small but aggressive local news station that loved HOA drama like kids love candy. By Sunday morning, the headline was everywhere. HOA president arrested after physical altercation with new homeowner, live on Facebook. The story went deeper. They interviewed residents, some scared, some gleeful. They dug into Karen's law license, suspended, into her vendor connections, conflicted, into her political donations, questionable. By Monday, her face was on the front page of the county newspaper, underneath the headline, Fall from Grace. Clearwater HOA president faces fraud allegations, assault charges. But it wasn't just about optics anymore. Her arrest triggered mandatory state-level audits into HOA activities. The Department of Business and Professional Regulation opened a file. The IRS requested clarification on multiple years of HOA tax filings. Vendors started lawyering up. One board member fled the state. Another turned state's witness. The clubhouse was padlocked pending investigation. The board's funds were frozen. And, through it all, I just watched. Karen tried to post bail that night. She was denied. Her lawyer had to file an emergency motion the next morning, but the judge wasn't impressed. This isn't just a personality dispute, he said. This is institutional misconduct with violent escalation. Karen left the courthouse in handcuffs. Her kingdom, the one built on fear, fines, and fake professionalism, was collapsing like a house of cards in a wind tunnel. I watched Karen's mugshot flash across the evening news with a strange, hollow sense of satisfaction. It wasn't joy. It wasn't gloating. It was like watching a storm finally burn itself out after weeks of destruction. She was no longer a force of nature, just another defendant in an orange jumpsuit, clinging to the last scraps of her narrative. The state moved quickly, faster than I expected, honestly. Within a week of her arrest, subpoenas landed at the HOA's registered address. The Department of Business and Professional Regulation suspended the HOA's corporate status pending investigation. The board's remaining accounts, 3 checking, 1 escrow, were frozen under a temporary court order. Then came the big one. The Florida Attorney General's office announced it had opened a criminal fraud investigation into Clearwater Knoll HOA and its former president, Karen Maddox. That triggered a cascade. Vendors started speaking. A former landscaping contractor turned over emails showing price inflation and reimbursement agreements. One of the board's past treasurers, a quiet man named Harold who'd resigned for health reasons, gave a full deposition to the state, complete with login credentials to Karen's old accounting software. And then came the real gold. One of the residents, a retired IRS compliance officer named Sandra, volunteered to assist the audit team. I couldn't have scripted it better. Between the forensic audit and the resident testimonies, the picture that emerged was staggering. Over $200,000 in improperly diverted funds, kickback arrangements disguised as consulting fees, forged signatures on 6 years' worth of board documents, tax filings that omitted entire classes of income. Karen, through her attorney, tried to claim it was an accounting misunderstanding. That lasted all of 2 days, until the prosecutor played recordings of her threatening residents with fines if they questioned invoices, and one call where she outright said, "They'll never catch it. Nobody reads these damn things." They caught it. The grand jury handed down a multi-count indictment: wire fraud, mail fraud, obstruction of justice, embezzlement from a nonprofit, and tax evasion. 5 charges carried federal weight. The rest were state level. Her total potential exposure, over 30 years in prison. But the prosecution wasn't interested in 30. They wanted a clean conviction and restitution. Karen's legal team tried to play hardball. They demanded immunity for 2 former board members, limits on asset seizure, and a reduced sentence. The DA gave them a simple choice: full confession, restitution, and 9 years in prison, or face trial on all counts. She blinked. The plea hearing was surreal. Karen stood in court, back stiff, voice low, reading her confession like it was someone else's obituary. She admitted to diverting funds, to forging signatures, to misleading the board, the homeowners, and multiple regulatory bodies. Her voice cracked when she said, "I thought I could manage it. I didn't mean to harm anyone." The judge wasn't moved. He handed down the full 9-year sentence, plus a $250,000 restitution order, half to the HOA trust, half to the IRS. She was taken into custody on the spot. No bail, no delay. The courtroom was silent. Outside, news crews buzzed like flies around a carcass. I didn't speak to them. I didn't need to. The paperwork did that for me, but I did stop to shake Sandra's hand. "You didn't just help audit a corrupt HOA," I told her. "You helped tear it down." By the end of the month, the court-appointed receiver issued a formal recommendation. Clearwater Knoll HOA was to be dissolved permanently. Its assets, including common areas, residual funds, and maintenance reserves, were to be distributed among the homeowners, prorated by dues paid. Each resident received a letter. Some cried when they read it. I sold Karen's house 2 weeks later. Market price, $460,000. It sold fast. People love a good scandal, even if they have to live in its aftermath. I donated a chunk of the profit, nearly $100 grand, to start a nonprofit called Homeowners Freedom Foundation. Its goal, to support legal defenses against overreaching HOAs and fund legislative reforms. I never thought I'd go from flipping houses to fighting civil abuse. But then again, I never thought someone would try to rewrite reality just to stay queen of a cul-de-sac. It had been nearly a year since the courthouse lights dimmed on Karen Maddox's trial. Seasons had turned. The headlines faded. The HOA was officially gone. Not restructured, not under review, but liquidated. The legal carcass of Clearwater Knoll dissolved into the bureaucracy from which it had once drawn its cruel authority. I didn't think about the place often, too much else on my plate. I'd expanded operations, picked up a few tax deeds across the state, ran workshops for other investors, even appeared in a finance podcast or 2. The Homeowners Freedom Foundation had quietly started getting emails from people in Georgia, Texas, even California, folks stuck in similar nightmares looking for a blueprint to fight back. But something pulled me back that afternoon. It was a Tuesday. Quiet, bright sky. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Just got in the car and drove. Clearwater Knoll didn't look the same. The ornate signs had been removed, replaced with a simple green street marker. No more gated security shack. It had been torn down. The fancy iron entrance arch, scrapped. What remained was a normal sunlit suburban street, like any other, stripped of its pretense. Karen's former lot sat silent, unrecognizable. The 2-story colonial was gone, demolished, clean. In its place stood a modest 1-story ranch-style house with wide steps, no fence, and a porch swing. No cameras, no ridiculous shrubbery trimmed like military formations. A man in his late 40s was standing by the driveway, hammering something into the ground. I parked across the street, walked over. "Afternoon," I said. He looked up, wary, then curious. "Hey, can I help you? I used to own the place. Briefly, just passing through." He smiled, relaxed. "You the guy who cleaned house around here?" I chuckled. "Depends on who you ask." He stepped aside so I could see the sign he'd just posted near the mailbox. Simple wood plank, hand-carved letters. No HOA. Free people live here. I stared at it longer than I meant to. "Built this myself," he said, pride in his voice. "Didn't want anything fancy. Just peace." "You got it," I said, meaning it. He nodded. "You ever need a beer, stop by. No permits required." I smiled, turned back toward my car. The air was warm, quiet. No clipboard patrols, no letters taped to garage doors about trash bins being visible. Just a man, his home, and a hand-carved message. As I drove off, I looked once in the rearview mirror. The sign swayed slightly in the breeze, catching the sunlight like a signal fire. Some fights aren't about property or policy. They're about dignity. And some victories don't need applause, Just a patch of land, finally free.